Hello, I want to tell you a story about water. The WWF state that water covers 70% of our planet, and it is easy to think that it will always be plentiful. However, fresh water is incredibly rare. Did you know that every single day in Italy we use on average 240 liters water, and that more than one-third of this we use to clean ourselves? Food and agriculture require even more. An example, it takes almost 1,000 liters water to produce 1 liter milk. At the current consumption rate, by 2025, two-thirds of the world population could face water shortage. So we must save our water. Let's start now. 4 easy tricks. First, turn off the taps while you brush your teeth. Second, take a shower instead of a bath. You will save up half the water you need to clean yourself. Third, don't wash your clothes so often. You may use them once more and save water doing so. Fourth, for those of you lucky enough to have a garden, water outdoor plants in the early morning or at the end of the day. This makes sure water goes straight to the roots where it's needed and that none is wasted. Every little effort counts when it comes to save our planet, so just do it. Thank you.
About what you're sourcing, like in terms of...
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Liam Condon and I'm the CEO of Bayer Crop Science. I actually come from Dublin in Ireland, and I'd like to start today with an image from my hometown, if I may. This is a sculpture on the quays of the River Liffey in Dublin. And the River Liffey is the main river that runs through Dublin, the capital city of Ireland. And this is an image of a family. It's supposed to depict the family from the Great Famine of the 1850s. And this is, if you think back, it's only about 170 years ago. And during the Great Famine, Ireland had a population of about 8 million people. 1 million, at least 1 million died of famine, died of hunger at that point in time, and many more millions, several million emigrated around the world. So that's why usually there's Irish pubs all over the world, in every country of the world nowadays, because so many people emigrated. And up until today, the population of Ireland has never actually recovered from this historical incident. And this historical incident actually goes back to a very relatively simple fungal disease of potatoes. And because the staple crop for Irish people at the time was potatoes, the fact that several harvests in a row were destroyed by this fungal disease meant that people starved to death or had to emigrate. And the reason that these statues are on the River Liffey is because that's where the boats were that used to take people to other countries. And they were called the death boats, the coffin boats, because most people who made it to the boat were so emaciated and so thin from hunger that most of them died on the way to other countries. So you can see here the impact of something as simple as a fungal disease in agriculture, which today we can completely control with crop protection products, but a lot of people have forgotten that largely for the most part of the history of mankind, we've lived in famine, and the average life expectancy was actually pretty short. It was only about 30 or 40 years old. It's only in very recent times that life expectancy has, because of multiple developments, has become much longer. Nowadays, we still have over 800 million people in the world today who suffer from hunger. We also have about 2 billion people who suffer from actual obesity, or what we would call also another form of malnutrition, whether it's undernutrition in the sense of hunger or overnutrition in the sense of obesity. This is a huge challenge that we face today. When we look at this challenge, we can say addressing malnutrition is a huge challenge, but addressing that in and of itself is not enough. We also need to address the challenges that the planet faces, particularly from an environmental point of view. And I think you can look at this from two angles, and as economists often do. You draw a supply and a demand curve, and you map out what the world looks like. But in essence, what we can say, the supply of food, how food is produced today, is in general too resource intensive. We're using too much land, which has a negative impact on biodiversity, too many inputs, be it fertilizers, pesticides, water. We're using too much of everything to produce what we're producing today. And on the consumption side, as I said, we have a real challenge with the current food system in that at least half of the people in the world's population are not served by the current system because they're either suffering from malnutrition or, on the other side, obesity. So both on the supply side and on demand side, there is a huge challenge. You can map out different parts of the world and say which ones are better at resource efficiency, or which ones have a higher quality consumption. Higher quality consumption meaning better nutrition, not just more calories, but better quality calories. And you can map out and you can argue about where different parts of the world are today, because different regions are in different locations. I personally believe the most important thing is that we're all clear about the direction that we would want to go and we would prefer to go. And I think this is this right upper quadrant where we want to ensure that everybody has enough access to healthy and affordable, nutritious food, but also that that food is produced in a manner that is sustainable, that is also sustainable from an environmental and from a biodiversity point of view. Now, clearly, the current system, the food system as it is today, is not in a sustainable trajectory. There are multiple indicators of this. I think there's many reports. Another one has just come out today on biodiversity from the IPBES at UNESCO. It was just published as we were coming in here, so I don't know if everybody, I guess not many people have had the chance to read the report. But in essence, it's describing something that we already know from the concept of the planetary boundaries, where in essence there is a safe zone where we can live within planetary boundaries, and then there is a danger zone where once we exceed whatever the planetary boundaries are, we're going to be in trouble. The planet is going to be in trouble, and ultimately that is going to affect the health of every human on the planet. And that's why it's so important to talk about these topics and the sustainability of our food system. What you can see from this depiction, and there are several different depictions of the planetary boundaries, what you can see is the most impacted areas are actually in the area of climate change, the nitrogen geochemical phosphorus cycle, but the biggest one is actually biodiversity, and that's why I think the report that came out today is so important, because it will highlight again the need to do more from a biodiversity point of view. And another one that's on the boundary here is also land use. So the issue of using too much land for agriculture, and land, if you're expanding land for agriculture, that often involves deforestation, which again, from a climate change point of view, is literally the worst thing that we could be doing. So there is a huge need for action here. My company, Bayer, is basically an innovation-based company, and we believe that the innovation that we work on, it needs to help ensure a more balanced and a more sustainable food system. And I think we need to think really in terms of food systems, and not just in agriculture, what happens on the farm, but the entire food system. So to address these challenges, we think one option, and I just want to give some concrete examples also as a kind of an appetizer for the discussion that we're going to be having in a few minutes. We think, as I said earlier, continuing with the status quo is not really an option. An incremental change is not going to get us to where we need to be. If you think about a future with up to 10 billion people in 2050, that's a scary amount of people. They all need to be fed. They all need land to live on. They all want to consume water and food. We're going to have to produce, even if we seriously tackle the issue of waste, we're still going to have to produce more, but we should really be doing it with less land and less inputs. So what we've been working on in our company, and I say we with a big W because whatever we're working on, it's never alone. It's always together with partners. I don't believe there used to be a day when companies could maybe do things all by themselves. I think those days are long gone. I think if you really want to implement change nowadays, you need to work together with others. Can be other companies, can be institutions, can be NGOs, can be governments. Ideally, it's a consortia of all of the above. I think this is the only way that you can really make a dent. What we're working on is some bolder, we'd say bolder, ambitious goals. We believe one key topic is, and particularly if we're talking about addressing climate change, to advance a carbon zero future for agriculture. So today, agriculture is clearly a part of the problem of climate change. It's not the biggest emitter. That's probably more the energy sector and the transport sector, but it's clearly a big emitter of greenhouse gases. And we believe there is a future possible when you think about the possibilities also of carbon being sequestered in the soil. There is a real possibility to get to a carbon neutral agriculture, which would basically mean we could make agriculture a part of the solution of climate change as opposed to being just a part of the problem. We believe another ambitious goal will be to literally achieve that we can produce more food, but using less inputs. And again, that means less land, less fertilizer, less pesticides, and less water. The third one, we believe that we really need to step up our efforts as far as smallholders are concerned. And I'll be very, very clear about this is not about corporate social responsibility. I represent a big company. When we talk about smallholders, there is a real issue here and a real need. When we talk about the increase in population that's going to come up until 2050, most of this is in sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia. 80% of the food consumed in these countries comes from smallholders. Unless we massively improve the lot and the productivity and the sustainability of smallholder farmers, there will be a social breakdown in these countries, and every other country around the world will feel the impact. So it really is in our best interests to tackle the issue of smallholders in a much more comprehensive way than we're actually doing it today. So these are ambitious goals that we are working on, and at the heart of what we do is what we call sustainable innovation, which for us means there needs to be, of course, an environmental component, but there also needs to be an economic component and a social component. I'll give you 3 quick examples, and then we can quickly move on with our discussion panel that we're going to have. One example for disruptive innovation that we're talking about, and this is a classical example where we partner with another company, create a joint venture that's working on disruption. In this case, a company called Join Bio, which is in essence basically working on natural microbes that can absorb nitrogen from the atmosphere and bring this to the roots of the plant in the soil. And if you can do this successfully, you need way less fertilizer than we currently need to give the plants the nutrients that they need so that they can grow effectively. So in essence, a biological solution to one of the biggest issues that we have from an emissions point of view, which is the amount of synthetic fertilizer in the world. This is a very, very disruptive approach, which we don't know if it works. By definition, the fact that it's disruptive means there is a possibility that this will completely fail. But if it works, it will change the face of agriculture, as did the advent of synthetic fertilizer many, many decades ago. So just one concrete example here. Another one is in the area of outcomes-based business models, and this is what I mean by also economic innovation. Clearly, if you have a model where you want to be as sustainable as possible, you actually want to incentivize everybody who's working together to use as few inputs as possible. Now that's a tricky thing if one part of the equation is actually getting incentivized to sell as much volume as possible. But if you flip this equation and you say, how do we incentivize things so that there's an incentive to use as little inputs as possible and get the best outcome? And this is what we call, in essence, a outcomes-based business model, which is only possible with the advent of digital farming and advances in digital sciences. So what we can do is basically, by gathering data on what's going on a field, we can make much smarter, much more tailored recommendations to individual farmers that will address their specific needs. And we are so confident of the outcome. For example, as an outcome, in an ultimate dream scenario, we would guarantee a certain harvest to a farmer. And either that happens and the farmer gets the benefit, or it doesn't happen and the farmer doesn't have to pay. So we take away the risk from the farmer and we share in the economic benefits. And it's in all of our interest to use as few inputs as possible in a model like this. We are piloting this approach right now as we speak on thousands of acres. And this is something with today's predictive capabilities, particularly using artificial intelligence technology, deep learning, it is possible to make much better predictions. And I think we're not so close to this right now, but we're close enough that we're confident that this will actually work. And this would be another great example of disruption in the agricultural space. A final one I share with you is on the whole topic of social innovation. And I think particularly big companies like ourselves, there is an image that we only work in research and development and develop new molecules and new seed varieties, which we do a lot of as well. That is our core business, to develop great seeds and new crop protection products. But if we want to address the issues of smallholders, we also need to make sure that we're investing in real social innovation. And that means addressing the needs of smallholder farmers. And the needs of smallholder farmers are not exactly the same as the needs of farmers in Western Europe or North America or Latin America, particularly the smallholder farmers in Sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia. There are often way more basic needs, simple things like good agronomic practices, training around this, access to finance, access to insurance, access to markets, pricing information. All of these components are absolutely crucial for, before you even get to the topic of inputs, seeds and crop protection products, all of this is important to have an ecosystem where smallholders can thrive. Without this, the smallholders will struggle. And I think this has been what we've experienced again and again and again. There have been many investments in improving the lot of smallholders, but they tend to focus on one area, maybe irrigation, or maybe finance, or maybe seeds, or maybe crop protection. But you can only really scale this if you look at it from an ecosystem point of view. So what we're working on is working together with different groups of social innovators who have access to the last mile, to the bottom of the pyramid, have direct access to smallholder farmers, and who all bring a different piece of the puzzle, of the smallholder puzzle, to the game, so that we can all collectively raise our game as far as smallholders is concerned. So this is just a concrete example around social innovation. Finally, I think I've spoken a lot about innovation and different dimensions of innovation. I think it's got to be crystal clear that whatever this innovation is, it's got to ensure consumer and environmental safety. That's the A to Z. There's no debate about this. This is the bare minimum that needs to be achieved. To do that, you need a degree of, or a very strong focus on science, because if you're ensuring safety, you don't want to do this in an emotional fit. You really want to make sure that whatever standards you're setting, that they're based on very good scientific practice. But you've also got to explain those standards and make sure that consumers are aware of what the benefits are for them. Otherwise, there will be no public trust. And the best science in the world will not get out of the gatepost if there is no trust in the science. So I think it's this combination of good science and public trust is fundamental to what we do. To enhance public trust, I personally believe that transparency is the currency of trust. So the more transparent we can be, the better. The more we can explain about what we do, why agriculture is important, why sustainable agriculture is important, and what the benefits are for consumers and the environment, the better. The less transparent we are, the more distrust there will be in the public. So it really is in our best interest to be here as transparent as possible. And I think that's, in essence, also what this conference is about. It's about entering a dialogue. I'm really, really happy that all of you have chosen to be here today. You could be in different places, you could be in different sessions, but clearly you're interested in the sustainability of agriculture. I think you're interested in the fact that everybody deserves healthy food, but that healthy food needs to be produced in a way that doesn't harm the planet. So thank you for joining us today. I think we're going to have a great conversation in our upcoming Q&A, and look forward also to your questions from the audience. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. My name is Louisa Boa-Taylor. I'm the head of media and research at AgFunder. AgFunder is an online venture capital firm investing in food tech and ag tech startups totally across the supply chain. And what's great about speaking on a topic like this today is that I feel that a lot of the technologies that we focus on, that we look at, that we write about in our media arm, all of them have the potential to have a positive impact, whether that's on the nutritional side for consumers with some of the issues that Liam brought up in terms of obesity numbers, or whether it's on the environmental side and looking at saving resources such as water. So it's a fantastic space to be in, and there's a lot of potential for lots of different technologies. So I'm going to introduce you to our panel now, who are going to talk to us about some of those different innovations more specifically. So on the end, I have Bruno de Souza. I can't, is that right? I can't quite pronounce the surname. He is a venture partner at Cargill Ventures, the corporate venture arm of Cargill. Then I have Anik
No.
Oh, there you are. Do you want to pronounce your surname?
Meirelles de Souza.
That's very hard as an English person. And then I have Anik Verween, that's a bit easier,
Yes,
from
perfect.
EIT Food Stars. Liam, you've all just met. Sorry, Thomas, I've got your card here. No, James Thorogood from Beresha, which is a startup company we're going to hear about in a minute, and Catherine Doherty from PepsiCo. So I'm going to start by asking you all, I'll start with you, Bruno, if you can tell me what keeps you up at night when you're thinking about the food and agriculture system?
Okay, that's a vast question. Good afternoon to everybody. So, currently, not only me, not only Cargill, but I think all the companies should be extremely aware of a couple of issues that are happening in the global, not only global economy, but the global spectrum. For us, ASF and the trade war between China and the US are two big subjects that, if you want to identify big trends, that keep us very much up at night. So ASF, so African swine fever, what they already called, and there was an article in a piece from Bloomberg just, I think, a couple of days ago, they call the Ebola of animals. So it's something that for us is a worrying factor, and I think for every agriculture company should be something that gives food for thought, and we want to, of course, eradicate it and limit its effects as soon as possible.
Within EIT Food, we look at the big food challenges, and then for me, it's always It comes to the same thing. We will be with more, you stressed it, almost 10 billion by 2050. People will have higher incomes, will want a more diverse diet, so we will need more food. But on the other hand, we have agriculture, which decreases the numbers of employment, total production. We have the loss of biodiversity, so we will get less. And I think that's a tricky one to sleep over.
Is there any one of those that really, what worries you more than others? Are you particularly concerned about nutrition, for example, or?
Yeah, well, nutrition and also the amount that we have as production perspective.
And Liam, you did a great introduction just now, but is there any specific issue that, you personally feel that you're most concerned about?
Yeah, for me, it's really this dual combination of addressing malnutrition and the environmental sustainability at the same time. I think it's an incredibly complex problem, and often there's a knee-jerk reaction to look for very simple solutions. This one is going to take, I think, some real deep thinking about how we really address it.
Right, yeah. Well, we'll get back to on what some of those could be. So, Catherine,
Christine.
What about you, Christine?
Yeah, so I'm with PepsiCo, and PepsiCo is an agricultural company. Most people don't realize that, but we are. If you think about it, we source over 30 different crops from thousands of farmers directly in over 40 different countries. Some of the products you might be familiar with: Lay's, Walker's, potatoes, fruits and vegetables from Naked Juice, citrus from Tropicana, and oats from Quaker. So to your question, what keeps me up at night? We engage directly with our farmers. The average age of a farmer globally is 60+ years old. How do we use technology to engage younger generation, and especially women, into agriculture? Because if we don't engage them and get them to be excited and use technology and give women, especially in many countries, the same resources that their male counterpart have, we will be in a world of hurt.
What keeps you up at night?
So Beresha focuses primarily on East Africa, where you have a massive base of smallholder farmers. And so that raises two key issues. You touched on one of them, which is the age issue. So the average age is incredibly high, and there's a huge migration from rural areas to cities. It's not glamorous to become a farmer. So that raises questions about what happens in the next generation. But I think an even scarier problem is that most of these farms that supply most of the food for the world's fastest growing region are on the precipice of economic disaster. They don't have basic insurance or credit lines that actually gives farm businesses the resilience they need to get from season to season.
And just picking up on a couple of those things, Christine, how do you think that technologies and innovations can be used to promote, agriculture as a job, as a role for women, or support them in that role?
Yeah, so technology, I think, has two faces, and we heard Liam talk about this. So our farmers can come from two different profiles. Some in the United States and in Europe, very large, highly sophisticated, can use precision ag to apply fertilizer at the small area with unique aspects, using GPS positioning and looking at canopy cover versus via aerial satellite. On the flip side, the smallholders that we heard about also need to use fertilizer, but they are down to the basics of technology. Do you use personal protective gear when you put fertilizer? Have you had a basic soil test so you know how much NPK to use? Very, very different spectrum of technology, but both farmers are trying to manage a global issue of nutrient management. We like to say at PepsiCo, working on global impact, but the technology must be locally relevant.
Did you want to add that?
Yeah, I think that it's really difficult for technology transfer to happen with these small producers. I mean, again, a huge part of that, and this is my bias, is that that's a finance gap. you can't get these innovations onto farms without some way of bankrolling it. But I'll also touch on a couple of like the interesting cultural barriers here too, because it's even beyond the technology, there are really challenging barriers in culture for that gender inclusiveness. Different crops are kind of operated by different parts of the household. And so some of the other ways you can innovate in livelihood is in how you interact with people in the household. To give a concrete example, depending on whether income is received in cash or digitally will affect the dynamics in the household. If women are in charge of dairy in the house and they're paid directly to a mobile phone, that has different implications for how the house runs and how the money is reinvested. So these kinds of soft interventions also are super complex.
Mm-hmm. Do any of you have any comments on
that? I just like when a startup is in the panel and the first thing that comes out of what keeps you out at night is not funding, it's something else, a little bit more strategic. That's a comment to James.
But I think that this issue of farmer demography, it is a huge challenge. And there is one very big upside now with the advent of digitalization, is that for younger generations, farming is becoming more attractive again. Mm-hmm. And in different parts of the world, there's different technologies, a lot of drone use, particularly in Asia Pacific. But there is a growing interest, and we can see in certain parts of the world a younger generation more willing to enter farming now, simply because it's become a more attractive job. It's not all this heavy manual kind of dirty work that it is as well. But it's become a lot more attractive through digitalization.
And do you think, the adoption of ag tech, so we're all here today and we're all very excited about ag technologies, but adoption rates are a little bit slow in some instances, and that is a challenge when you think about you're a venture capital investor like Bruno looking for certain returns as a venture capitalist. But I'm wondering if this generational change, as and when it happens, should we expect to see, what's called a J-curve? Should we expect to see some explosive adoption, do you think?
I think so. There is for sure a generational issue, but at the end of the day, even let's say the older generation usually has a smartphone, and usually the applications that are being applied now today in agriculture are so simple to use that the barrier to entry is relatively low. Mm-hmm. Particularly if the farmer has kids in the family, because the kids then explain to the parents how it all works. So I do think there will be a faster pickup with the new generation, but we can already see with the older generation today, as long as the technology is fit for purpose in the sense of as user-friendly, as simple to use as possible, then the penetration can be pretty quick.
Mm-hmm. And can you tell us about EIT Food and what your focus areas are?
Yes, well, EIT Food is an open innovation ecosystem. We get money from the European Commission in order to tackle the big food challenges and make food healthier, make it safer, make it more transparent, all the big buzzwords all together. So we are an ecosystem of more than 50 big corporates and big universities as members. But next to that, we also have a group of 50 more mature startups, early scale-ups, to help triggering that innovation ecosystem. And indeed, also in what you mentioned when it comes to digitalization and the use of data, we have so much companies really working on that. And I think to complement on what you already said, the fact that indeed I do expect an increase because there is so many new stuff thrown to different farmers. Every company wanted to do it by themselves. And now we have more and more other startup initiatives who say, okay, but let's group those data and do something with it and make it easier for a farmer to use it and implement it in their daily use. So I do think also there, by triggering the different puzzle pieces together, we will get easier to success, and it will be easier for farmers to do something with the data and improve things.
Mm-hmm. And thinking about trends of innovation that you've seen entrepreneurs in Europe, focusing on, what can you say some of the key spots have been?
Yeah, I think really, specifically if we look at the network within EIT Food, which is still limited, although we are a big network, we have smart farming, smart breeding, and circularity in farming. Those are three very big trends that we really focus on, and also a lot of companies within the network.
Okay. And Bruno, can you tell us a bit about what you, some of the technologies that you hope might be able to solve some of your biggest fears at night?
So picking up on what Annick just mentioned, I think agriculture is from the last 10 years picking up the pace from other sectors, especially from fintech, from other areas in technology, and it's getting there. What Leon was just saying is step-by-step, an incremental innovation. It's getting there. It's not a disruptive, but it's incremental. It's getting there. But I think that the next few years to come, data, especially data, is going to be one of the big areas of, I will not say improvement, but of interest. The way that you capture, the way that you productize, and the way that you make something out of data. How do you model? How do you predict? How do you teach your AI models? And how do you teach your everything that you do with data is going to be interesting. Another big area is going to be the automation of the workforce at the level of, I would say, plantation even. So if you go, the population of the world is not getting younger. There's not more people to work. So people working in agriculture is not the most attractive situation. So the situation of automatization of workforce in remote areas, in the communication out of those remote areas. You see what's happening with precision agriculture, and we see what's happening with the mesh networks being adopted all over the world, and the payment systems, etc. So that comes in the back end of a digital transformation, a stronger automatization of the workforce, etc., etc., etc. So it's a couple of different terms, but AI, ML, all about with those two areas in robotization are going to be huge in agriculture, and are already big, but we estimate that they are going to be huge in the next years to come.
Yeah, great. Well, let's talk a bit about robotics then, because that is a big theme. And looking at some of the investment numbers from last year, there was a big increase in investment into robotics. I think about 50%. It's been a slower area of innovation in ag tech. I think because robotics is very hard and it's also very expensive. So entrepreneurs often need to raise a lot more money, which can be challenging. But just from where you're sitting, Lim, how have you seen robotics being adopted, and what do you think are some of the key functions that robotics entrepreneurs should go for in agriculture?
Yeah, I may maybe clarify up front, we're not specifically in robotics, because we're a big believer in kind of sticking to the core competencies. Yeah. And we're not an engineering company.
Sure, but thinking about climate and the data that you'll collect.
We do partner with companies in the robotics space. Particularly if you think of kind of the challenges that farmers face, usually the one that comes, apart from, for example, access to finance or training or these issues, the biggest challenge that they face on the field is usually related to weed management. And there's different systems, of course, but one of them is also using robotic systems. So this is an area where we also look at, is there a better way of clearing fields from weeds than, for example, using a herbicide or manual labor or tillage, which can often have negative influences on carbon sequestration. So that would be a classical example. We are, I would call ourselves technology agnostic. So what we're interested in is the best solution, and best meaning that it's safe, it's sustainable, and it's economic. And if robotics turns out to be better than something we have in our portfolio, then we would invest in robotics. So that's the way we look at it right now.
And when you say that you partner with robotics companies, is that in terms of them using the data from climate to help?
Yeah, different models, but it would usually be in the space of, we have our digital farming platform is Climate Corporation, and then we would have a data exchange, and at the end of the day, we assess which system is more effective in doing the job that we actually want to get done.
Right, okay. And what about robotics for emerging markets then, and developing nations across Africa? Is it going to be a long time until they really get to the farm?
I think it'll be a while still, for two reasons. One, again, the finance. These innovations are really expensive to get on farm. But two, these farms haven't consolidated yet. And in fact, every 5 years, the average farm size in East Africa gets smaller. So it's really difficult to adopt these mass, seeding or harvesting technologies if you don't have scale at the farm level. So I think that's going to be decades away.
I would actually just reference, there is a company that I wrote about recently called Tartan Sense in India, and they're making a small robot that can do a similar type of task as Blue River Technologies, which was a larger Californian startup, where you can scan the crop and identify the weed and then spray with herbicide. So that's specifically small robots for small farms, but I think they're one of the only ones.
Yeah, I think when it comes to remote sensing or drone-based sampling, those kinds of technologies for bringing precision agriculture to small farms, I think that's much closer on the horizon.
Much closer.
Very exciting.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just to add, Louise, and also to construct a little bit on what Liam just mentioned, for us also it's important that all the technologies come strategically fit in our business. It's not the other way around. So it's kind of the businesses drive what we do. We don't tend to bet on disruptive technologies or sidewise business. 150 years old of track record, we need to keep on going on, plus than 150 years old. But just to add also to the African and the emerging markets technology aspect, I think that technology nowadays has a lot to do with the adaptability of that technology to the market. Sometimes in Africa it can be used in this kind of a stripped way, a little bit more light, so we would call the Pepsi light or the technology light, and you could go light on that technology, or you could go more heavy on the technology. There's that picture nowadays, and with the competition globally from China, US, etc., and the world is global, you can opt whatever you want, and the equability to each market are important also, the way that you use it.
And have you come across any robotics startups across Europe yet?
A few, not so many to be honest. We have some. We had Robotics, but now they are too big to be a rising food star, so they are out, which is good. But if you look at the new ones coming in, no, it's not so often robotics. It's really about all those data can be measured. How can we turn that in a product? And how we can bring those data closer to the farmer. And there we see a lot of different things. The fact that indeed we say, okay, we can't get more food, but we can do it so much more efficient. And by bringing technologies, lab on a chip, things closely to the farmer in order for them to measure and also decide at the same time, a lot of young companies, especially in Europe, are focusing on that. But I do agree, and it fits with what you said, James, if we ask them about their customer, they talk about the European farmers and preferably the big ones, because then they only need 2 farmers and they can start working.
Right.
While on the other hand, you lose on the small farmers in Europe, but definitely in other countries. So what you say, by doing things light, that is something that doesn't happen enough, to my opinion, at the moment. I do think there's a lot of possibility also for established companies to say, okay, let's make a light version and focus on different markets.
Yeah, we have an example, because of course a lot of our innovation originates in, I'd say, on the west coast, the east coast of the US and or Germany. But specifically if we're talking about smallholders, clearly we need a completely different approach than this type of approach. So we have a model for smallholder, a digital model for smallholders based in India, developed out of India. Actually quite basic, but it meets the needs. And it's something that would not work in Western markets, but it actually works very well in India, and it's being rolled out into Asia as we speak. But I think this is important, that the source of innovation is also close to the customer, because those needs are so specific. You cannot develop this from 10,000 kilometers away with a model in mind that is basically focused on different customer needs.
Can you explain a bit more about what that service is and how it differs to what's in the Western world? Is it mobile phone based?
Yeah, it's mobile phone based. So often not even smartphone, because it's sometimes just simple mobile phone. And simple things like, again, a good agronomic practices, training modules on a smartphone, has a WeChat, so that farmers, WeChat function, so that farmers amongst themselves can basically exchange best practices, so they're constantly putting in SMSs and saying what works, what doesn't work. It gives access to market information, so in what market can I get what price in real time. Weather information, so a whole variety, a bunch of information very specific to their locality, but very basic, and addresses key needs that they have.
And they can use just a basic sort of SMS, text, phone?
Yeah.
Okay. I often do wonder, though, and Christine, maybe you can talk to this, that we did see in Africa with the mobile phone, a lot of those nations leapfrogging the landline phone. And I do wonder if there is a chance for emerging markets, they've got such a different level of agricultural development, to potentially adopt technologies more rapidly, or leapfrog over some of the technologies that they're not using. Maybe that's with mechanization. I don't know if you've got any thoughts about the potential for that to happen.
Yeah, I would agree with you. The thing that we see that's very successful with many of our farmers, large scale or smallholder, is peer-to-peer learning. And so at PepsiCo, we like to partner with entities. A number of them are here on stage with me. And we have what we call a demonstration farm in locations. And what that is we ask the farmer to quadrant off a piece of his or her land, and then we'll bring in partners to show technologies that are relevant to that farmer. And so then we also open up to the community, so that farmer, to get access, has to be willing to have the other farmers come, look at the technology, ask the farmer what works, what doesn't work, get their hands in the soil, look at the outcome, because farmer-to-farmer knowledge, peer-to-peer, is how you scale. The other thing, too, that we're trying is essentially having farmers make their own videos about practices in the field. And to your point about robotics, robotics can mean many different things to many different people. But if we have farmers that can use their cell phone or simple cameras, film what they're doing in the field, and then they share that in the community, it's very powerful. And so there's some companies that are starting now doing video training, farmer to farmer, peer to peer, and that has been very successful.
Just to build on that, we have a project in Ivory Coast with cacao, and we are doing exactly that. So we are doing from the co-op back, and as James rightly said, the size of the farms is not that big, or it's not that enormous in Africa. So we are doing traceability, and now we are entering a financial mode also with reverse factoring towards the farmers in Ivory Coast, the farmers that we output cacao. So we are tracing the cacao from the origin and doing all the steps, and other this took us a couple of years to get the education of the farmers to do what they are doing now, and now we are achieving that. I think it's one of the systems that's working for a commodity. I don't know too many currently around the world. I know one in coffee and one in cacao that are really working from almost farm to fork. We still need the part until the brand, the business to consumer part, but business to business chain, supply chain is working.
Yeah, that traceability, those traceability tools, how are you using those when you're thinking about sustainable sourcing?
Yeah, so for PepsiCo, we have a number of commitments where transparency, traceability for some of our raw products. We have committed by 2020 to sustainably source our direct crops. Those are farmer produced crops, potatoes, whole corn, oats, and oranges. We talked about that. But then we use other certification standards, Bonsucro for cane sugar, RSPO for palm oil, and other entities. The consumer expects transparency. They demand it. It's not an option. They want to know where their food comes from. They want to know companies are being responsible. If we're going to transform the food system, and clearly PepsiCo wants to be a partner and a leader in that, we have to be willing to accept that transparency, accept the humility that there are opportunities in the supply chain. And we heard Liam talk about the fact that no one company can solve it. And so we have to be willing to partner, open up, look at technologies, make sure that they're relevant for the particular farmer, and then we convey that information to the consumer. Because at the end of the day, if the consumer is not going to believe a company and buy its products, it's all for naught.
Did you want to follow up?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are in the business of traceability ourselves. We're building those types of solutions because we've found that even if you can track your bulk produce through the supply chain, it's very difficult to get farm-level data about what's actually happening and to know who the people are behind that production. So even some of the biggest value chains in tea and coffee and cocoa in East Africa where we work, they're still using paper or spreadsheets at the point where they collect that produce. So we're building kind of that last mile data collection so you can build the profiles of individual producers. We've worked with large corporates that are injecting huge amounts of cash in their supply chain, which are with the destination of being the farmer, but actually it doesn't quite make it all the way, and they have no way of knowing what actually gets back to producers. How can we report on ESG metrics to our customers and shareholders if we don't even know who we're sourcing from at the end of the day?
Should we now talk about blockchain? I try to avoid it a little bit sometimes because I feel like there might be quite a lot of hype or overexcitement at this point. Is it too early for us to actually be using blockchain for it to be useful? It sounds like we're still at paper and pen. There's a lot more to be done before blockchain. But you guys are the experts. What do you think?
I get this question a lot, as you can imagine. People, blockchain.
Maybe just explain what blockchain is, if you can, too.
So I'm not an expert in blockchain. We've actually decided not to use blockchain for now. But blockchain represents a decentralized way of storing and recording information. And in some cases, it can increase the security of your data storage and transmission. And it has some other great benefits in certain applications. But I think we're still trying to figure out where to use it. And it has some major performance limitations for now. So in terms of the number of transactions you can process, and especially in our case, it doesn't handle offline conditions very well. I mean, most of the places where we really need to get data for the first time are low connectivity environments. So we're starting with basic data capture first, and in the future there might be room for blockchain.
Yeah.
I think that regarding your question regarding blockchain and regarding DLTs, blockchain is one of the technologies within the decentralized ledger technologies. But I think people need to start taking this one as a technology by itself and not as a subject. So it's a technology that maybe favors, like James was saying, so if you are in a remote area of Africa, you cannot do nothing, for instance, without a network. So that's the first technology that you need. You need a USSD, you need a whatever 12-bit network, or you need a mesh network to, now potentially one day you need a 5G network to have more broadband. And then after that, you bring it to a front end where you have a storage process or cloud process, and then if you want to storage in a decentralized way, then you use a DLT, whatever the DLT you use. You use Ethereum, you use blockchain, you use whatever the technology it is. It's just people need to start getting out of it. And just to add also to your question, for instance, one of our positions regarding that is just a technology. It's a good technology to use, and we have projects in that, and we have a strategy towards that type of approach, a technology strategy. But when that technology comes with an economical point of view of tokens or what they call cryptocurrencies attached, we don't even get close to it. So it's kind of that's one of the other items that I leave here to.
Yeah, if I can add something, when it comes to measuring everything and know what happens if it's blockchain or another technology, for the consumer that's not so important. What we do know, and that's something that we also test within EIT Food because we work closely with the consumer, we do know that they still do not trust what happens in the food system. They have different reasons for that, but a lot of it always comes back to, okay, we buy it in the supermarket and we might know what was the step before, but everything before that is a black hole. And okay, blockchain scares them off, but they need to have more information on what happens there. And as Chris said, okay, we will have to open up and show everybody that we do this with good intentions, and that processes might look different as the average consumer expects, but still it's there and it's well controlled and it has an impact, and it's so important to get that trust of the consumer back again.
Yeah, I mean, we use blockchain partially in our operations, mainly because it helps improve efficiency, particularly of distribution. But I do think the bigger benefit would actually be if we can use it to enhance traceability, and with that just create more transparency about what food is coming from, how that food was produced, because that is ultimately going to be the one that addresses what the consumer needs are. The other one is just helping us manage our costs, but the bigger win, I think, is addressing that consumer need for simply more transparency of it. Just want to know, how is that food produced? Was it produced in a good way?
Right.
Is it healthy food? And then I think there would be a real benefit to this.
Right, right. And why do you think there's been, so much excitement around blockchain? Is it just because it's a term? I think, a few years ago, AI was, all startups suddenly started saying they were using AI and to attract venture funding. Is it because it's a venture word? Like, does anyone have any thoughts about why it's blown up like it has?
Anything that is directly connected with a new source of economical income for people generates an extra interest. AI is not directly connected with a new source of income. So when DLT started appearing, and then blockchain was one of the first, and then attached to blockchain came bitcoins, and it came the cryptocurrencies, of course, that generated an extra interest in people around the world, because that through mining, through other types of trading attached to it, that technology went directly into the pocket of people, or the pocket of people that were not directly connected with technology. Well, on one side it was good because it was a rapid expansion. It led to a rapid expansion of that, but by another side it created a lot of speculation that was bad. So you see the ICOs, now you see the new SFOs in the US, and you see all the things that are happening regarding technology that is related to DLTs are not necessarily positive. Because you are in the wave of companies now. For instance, we have an example: companies that are in GHG, that are connected to sustainability, so greenhouse gases. Now is the new wave of technology of blockchain or DLTs are being used the way that they are being used.
Okay, I'd love to move into talking about biotechnology, if that's okay with everyone. Specifically on the genetics side, there is a lot of innovation and excitement around the potential for gene editing technologies to produce crops that not only can withstand increased environmental stress, but could also produce nutritionally enhanced crops. So just firstly, I'd love to just go through the panel and just get your initial thoughts on how you feel about genetic tools and genetic technologies. Are you positive about it?
I think we need to approach them carefully, of course, but I think that they promise really exciting gains. I think, again, from the sort of East African context, one of the really interesting stories from the past that might be telling for the future is that we've previously brought new genetics into these regions. I'm thinking of cows, beautiful black and white Frisian cows from the Netherlands, brought in and crossbred with local Ankole cattle. And there's a certain tipping point in that genetic profile where your cows are going to start getting sick much more often from tick bite fever or other endemic diseases. So I think we're going to have a lot of unanticipated effects or crop failures that might result from developing something in Germany and then shipping it to Uganda. But of course, that localization will be part of the wave of gene editing, I hope.
And just sort of on a moral, ethical grounds, you have no problems with genetic manipulation?
No comment.
Okay.
Still thinking about it.
Christine.
Yeah, I think technology in general. At PepsiCo, we look at the science. We confer with stakeholders. We look at regulation, governmental entities, laws, and so technology in itself should not be afraid. We shouldn't be afraid of it. However, let's make sure that we don't have unintended consequences, exactly what we heard about the cattle. And so we will need to embrace technology, and I'll put that as a holistic, what that is. There's a bunch of different technology, but if we're going to feed the 9 billion and reduce the amount of resources and pressure on the land, we as an agricultural community have to get used to technology.
Mm-hmm. Liam.
So I guess you'd be really surprised if I said this is all bad stuff. But let me try and give you a bit of a differentiated answer. I mean, I think one thing is what's fundamentally often not understood is that genes are constantly evolving in nature. Everything is genetically modified. So the discussion is just really, should this happen completely randomly, or should we as humans be allowed to also do this in a much more precise manner and avoid sometimes the randomness and the fallout of that in nature. And there are different tools around, and I think the one that's most under discussion right now is, of course, CRISPR-Cas9, which has human possibilities, has plant possibilities, animal possibilities. For sure, this technology, I think, has fantastic potential. So in the plant world, simple things like creating, for example, in a climate-challenged world, drought-resistant seeds, or crops with peanuts without allergens, or whatever it is, crops with additional nutrients. So that possibility is there. I think it's very clear that first and foremost we have to ensure that whatever is developed is absolutely safe from a human, environmental, ecosystem point of view, so that goes without saying. And I think with this advent of technology, I think the GMO story has taught us one thing is that you can't just push a new technology into the market and because it's wonderful technology, assume the market is going to love it. You've got to make extra efforts to explain what are the benefits, again, for consumers, for farmers, for the environment, and what are the possible downsides, and what are you doing to mitigate the downsides? And I think this is the conversation that we need to have, and we need to do that in a very responsible manner. And again, that won't be single companies or single governments. That will require really a consortium coming together. And we do need to look at this not just from a science technology point of view, but also from an ethical point of view, and make sure we're addressing the concerns.
Yeah, I often think that with the advent of GMO, a lot of scientists had made this fantastic discovery, and they're very, very excited about it and all the potential, and it just wasn't translated, or that there was that missing piece because they thought they were, doing good things.
Well, I think that the key thing was at the time the focus, the story was originally Monsanto, who we acquired. Monsanto was highly focused on farmers, and was so completely won over by the benefits for farmers and explained the benefits to farmers, but didn't make the extra rounds to the consumers. And with that, a lot of skepticism came about what is this, how is this used? And then if the technology is not used in the right way, if there's a lack of stewardship, yeah, there will be issues in certain areas. So we need to ensure that the technology is not just introduced and explained, but it needs to be stewarded properly, it needs to be used properly, and that ecosystem also needs to be in place. So I think there's tremendous learnings in there. I think there is a great opportunity. I think it would be remiss of us, particularly in Europe, a decision has already been taken at the European Court of Justice level, to declare basically gene editing in the same category as GMOs, which de facto means that this generation of technology is lost for Europe and Africa, because most African countries take their regulations from Europe. It will be lost unless there's a change of regulation. A change of regulation will only come if there is a broad societal alliance that actually wants this technology. So that won't be individual companies on their own. That needs to be universities, that needs to be NGOs, that needs to be companies as well, of course. But I think that this is important.
Yeah, no, I'd love to come back to that collaboration piece. But Alec, how that decision was made? I think it was last year, to treat gene editing as GMO. How has that impacted innovators here that might have been focusing on that space?
Well, it did, of course, impact a lot of young companies who are really focusing on that. I do think.
Have they just had to stop?
Yeah, some of them really had to stop. They say, okay, we have a good idea, it's a great idea, there's a lot of interest, but it involves CRISP. And that was just, then it's a no-goer, then you can't continue. However, the good ones, they just thought about different ways of getting to the final result, because I do think, indeed, as Christine said, we shouldn't be afraid of technology, but technology cannot be an objective by itself. It's always there to solve something. And okay, there are a lot of advantages of gene editing and all the technologies around it, but on the other hand, there are also a lot of other ways of reaching the same objective. If we look at biodiversity, I said in the beginning, we have the loss of biodiversity, but in the end, how many of the crops do we cultivate already for 300 years, where there's so much more? So It closes a couple of doors, which to my opinion shouldn't be closed, but who am I to decide on that? But it can also open some doors to other ways of getting into that objective. And I think that is really key, that it's not just the technology by itself, but also what it tries to accomplish.
Bruno, tell us your thoughts on gene editing, and maybe you could give a few examples of its use in animal agriculture.
Yeah, I'll rather approach this in a more macro way. So, following your words, your wise words, so Cargill is an organization this year with 155 years old. So we are delivering food in different ways, through different supply chains, through different countries for this amount of time. And the first priorities that we have above all is food safety, and safety not only of our supply chain, but safety of our employees. So we would not give others what we would not give ourselves. So this is, we first, as usual, we first eat it ourselves before we give out the outside world. And I think that also in that segue, we, of course, are aware of technology. We are aware of investments in our own businesses. We have more than 30 businesses currently spread through 5 different divisions. We have businesses in animal nutrition. We have businesses in animal protein. So we are one of the leaders in animal protein. And that's why when we opened, we brought the subject of ASF. It's something that is concerning us. Gene editing is something that we are also looking at. We are looking at into different aspects, but not directly. We're not invested in it directly, and we're not directly, so we don't have an input business, for instance, or a declared input business, and if you could get back to the GMO situation. But although we look at it, and we look at how we can cope with the evolution of the different companies in the world.
So I'll give a few examples on the animal side then, since you would. And thinking about developing markets and the potential application there are some startups that are looking at ways to make heat-resistant cattle, so have an Angus breed cattle that could be raised in hot climates. I think it would be, you have a fluffy black Angus cow, they're going to end up being less fluffy and have white fur, for instance. Have you, have you come across that, and do you think that would be a useful tool for African nations to have?
Haven't seen it yet. I know it's happening. Again, I think there's a lot of great stuff that's
what's the acceptance? What acceptance do you think there would be around that?
I think it really goes right back to what Christine said earlier about how you make people aware of new innovations and how you get them to buy in. It's really hard to go in and explain something and say, these are the benefits, these are the costs, make a rational decision. What we find is that 95% of farms will be very wary of any major changes to production. I mean, they have a very low risk tolerance. So you have to find a couple of individuals who are the vanguard for new, to adopt new technology or a new breed, and to use kind of social innovations like demo farms to propagate that technology. So it's hard to speculate on the acceptance, but I think that's probably the pathway to getting acceptance.
Okay, well, let's finish off talking a bit about collaboration. So as you mentioned, Liam, with the topic of gene editing, there is need for collaboration, multiple stakeholders throughout the supply chain. And I'm aware that there are a few startups in the gene editing space who are getting together and thinking about forming some sort of coalition to make sure that they're communicating better with the public on that. But just thinking more about collaboration in terms of getting these innovations on the ground, getting them adopted, what types of players are you working with to try and ensure adoption of technologies for good?
In general, not just
gene editing, in general.
So, I mean, we have a pretty big research and development organization. We've got about 7,500 scientists. And we spend about €2.5 billion a year in research and development, so there's quite a bit that we can do ourselves. The main focus is, however, on improving seed quality and crop protection innovation, plus the digital farming part. That's kind of where we see our core competence. Everything that's potentially disruptive in agriculture are areas for us where we would then partner. So this is a choice that we make, and I gave the example earlier on, the joint venture with Ginkgo joined this company, and this would be a classical example. It's something that we believe could be highly disruptive, but we would never be able to do this in-house. The investment, to justify an investment where the probability of success is so low, you will never do it, because you will always err on the side of the projects that have a higher probability of success. And they are rather going to be ones that favor incremental change. True disruption has always going to only have a low probability of success. So we need a different model. And we basically have like Bruno's model, we basically have our own venture capital arm, where we invest then in different companies, early stage, sometimes it's seed capital, sometimes it's a licensing agreement, partnership agreement, sometimes could be a straight acquisition, like for example, Climate Corporation. So different models in that space. Then of course we have our collaborations with universities, where a lot of great research is done, and we try and translate that then into practical use on a field. And of course with governmental institutions, for example, Embrapa Tropical agriculture in Brazil. So we have a broad ecosystem of collaboration partners, and we are very dependent on them for new ideas, and we're always basically reprioritizing where we spend our funds, and we want to spend where we think we're going to have the biggest impact.
Great. And Christine, I've heard of a few consumer-facing companies that have partnered with ag tech startups on the biotech side. For instance, AB InBev, the beer company, they have partnered with Indigo Agriculture, which is a company that's creating these microbial-coated seeds that can withstand certain stressors, use less water, and they say it produces a more sustainable rice that they can use. And also equally, there's a company called Benson Hill, which is doing gene editing, and they've partnered with Mars for more sustainable cocoa. So I'm wondering, have you looked at any, are you interacting with any startups on that sort of front, or what kind of collaborations do you have when you think about your sustainable sourcing?
Yeah, we have a number of collaborations similar to what Liam had. We have a venture startup entity in-house. We partner with universities. We also engage with other entities that may have innovative ideas. We see a lot of them out there on the floor today. But I think one of the unique ones that we've just started, and this goes to my very first comment of how do we engage more women in the supply chain. And so we are partnering with entities like CARE, USAID, to really look at how we lift up women in agriculture. Recently we made a pretty large grant, 18 million, to CARE, to She Feeds the World, as well as some innovative filmmakers on closing the crop gap. And so we all know, sitting up here today, that if we can get women the same resources, that is going to massively change our agricultural footprint. So that's the technology. I'm hoping that it's a gender-based technology, but that would be really great if we can get that jump started.
Are there any other collaborations that you think would be helpful in promoting women in agriculture?
Yeah, absolutely. I think all of the comments up here today, clearly education, microfinancing, the ability to have resources, training, land rights. Some of them are cultural issues. And so when I said beware of unintended consequences, you just can't go in and say, okay, we're going to give a lot of money to some women to do an agricultural project, because it may be social issues within the community that they can't do it that way. So we don't know. And that's where we're partnering with those NGOs that really have a good understanding about women in ag, so that we can be helpful in a way that's really going to move the needle.
And Debs, your model is based on collaboration with other startups, and I've noticed recently there is more partnering between startups that offer different types of technologies. Can you just talk a bit about the role of collaboration in what you do?
Yeah, so I can talk first about collaborating with other startups, but also talk about some of these new ecosystems that are being built by some of the huge incumbents, which are really helpful. So I think in more mature markets, like in Europe or in the US, a lot of ag tech is focused on kind of improving yields by 1%, or there's a lot of kind of production-oriented technologies, supply chain, whereas in emerging markets, a lot of startups are focused on building ecosystems or networks for the first time. Without those, you can't really bring in the other cool stuff. So working in East Africa is so exciting because it's one of the world leaders in mobile payments technology. They're leapfrogging in terms of digital financial services. So we do rely on a lot of other startups that are innovating much more quickly than regional banks or other stakeholders, and that there's a critical mass building. But on the second point, what are these large players doing for the ecosystem? Like, I think now is probably one of the best times ever to be an agriculture-focused startup. The networks and the supply chains that are commanded by some of these enormous consolidated global companies in agriculture, ADM, Syngenta, Cargill, Bayer, I mean, they have so much that they can offer to innovation in agriculture. I mean, we're here at this conference thanks to Bayer and supporting a number of sustainable startups. So I think as these networks form that produce startups and these moonshots, I think that's going to really make a difference.
Yeah. Annick, what's your advice to your startups on collaboration?
Well, collaboration for me is easy. I think EIT Food collaboration is the raison d'être, the reason why we exist, the reason why we try to put stakeholders together in order to tackle some of the challenges, but in a pre-competitive way. So if it becomes competitive, then you do it one-on-one, and it's a different story. So the good thing within EIT Food is that we do not only work with those big corporates and big universities, but we do have those rising food stars like mature startups, early scale-ups, who can really also work together and collaborate with those big partners in order to make a change. And they really, I think the convenient way of being in EIT Food, it's pre-competitive, so there's not a direct added value for the company, which makes it also much more difficult to finance it, but there is an added value for the Commission. So the European Commission co-finances part of the collaboration, which makes it easier and more. Well, you don't have to be so risk-averse. Consortia can much easier trial things, and it's innovation money. So if it fails, it fails, and we hope on those few successes. So it's a way to trial things, new technologies, see if big corporate startups can work together with big universities in order to have something that can come to the market in a short time frame.
And Bruno, what about in venture capital? How important is
I think
collaboration?
without collaboration, there is no ecosystem. And without an ecosystem, we cannot grow where we are to another level. So it's very simple. I think for us, it's essential. We see it as a puzzle, where we have the pictures and we don't have the pieces. So the pieces are different type of universities, other corporates, startups, especially startups, founders, the most important part of the ecosystem, accelerators, incubators, etc., etc. So we have our own programs. We are going to expand our network of programs. We're going to expand collaboration with founders. We're going to spend more time with founders. A day that we don't spend in the venture area time with founders is not a good day. So it's like a day where a salesperson doesn't spend time with the client. So the founders drive this ecosystem. The other items, lawyers, banks, investment, are support for what it comes. So open innovation is all about collaboration and about that. So I can give you examples, and I can give you one suggestion. So examples is we have a program, Farm to Fork, that's running with Textiles in Minneapolis. We have hundreds of applications. We have different startups that are going on, and we are collaborating in that program with another big corporate that's called Ecolab. So we don't do it alone. So we're soon going to announce something in Africa, so we will not ever do it alone. So we do it in collaboration. We are running POCs in collaboration with different companies, some of them going to be present here. And that's one of the oils that goes through, or the red line that goes through the ecosystem, is to mitigate risk. Usually corporates run POCs. POCs, proof of concept, sorry for the, run POCs. And maybe in that area there's a lot still to be fought, like a GitHub for POCs or something like that to be fought around, because with diminishing the involvement or diminishing the time of involvement in the POCs can give more opportunities to those guys that are on the outside, that running on burn rates that are very short, and they can survive for longer, or that can bet longer in things that we are not thinking, and that's how we can disrupt also a little bit our system.
Great. I'll just see if there are any questions for our panelists from the audience. Yep, one in the middle there. I think there's a microphone coming.
Thank you for that very interesting conversation. You had briefly touched on blockchain and how you can securely save data and so on and so forth. Have you any thoughts about, the garbage in, garbage out? So basically, when you start recording data on the blockchain, how you can secure trustworthy, authentic data management right there?
That's a great question. Do you want?
Yeah, I mean, this is what we work on every single day. So we've seen a lot of digitization efforts, whether it's blockchain or centralized data storage. They all fall on their face because where the data is being collected is a very difficult environment. It's happening on the fringes, very, very distant rural areas, very low capacity staff, low literacy rates, and very limited technology. So that's kind of a formula for really poor data entry. And add bad motivation, or I should say low motivation, and even sometimes perverse incentives, and it becomes very difficult to get any reliable data. So I think our approach has always been to lead with a very useful product that relies on good data and that has the right people checking it at the right times. So we create very tight feedback loops between our data entrants at the warehouse and their managers in the city, so that they have to hold each other accountable. We make the data more visible that goes in. I mean, you've totally nailed it. This is the hardest challenge in the whole ecosystem, is getting good data. And then we up the ante. So once we've started data collection for these businesses, we also move towards cashless payments. So for the off-takers who manage sourcing from farmers, they check those numbers even more carefully, because otherwise they're going to send the wrong amounts of money to farmers through our service. So again, by linking a clear product to each of these data collection tasks, we increase the incentive to get it right. And I think that's the only way forward.
Great. Any other questions from the audience? Oh, right next door.
Yes, hello. Thank you for the very good discussion. Liam, you said something looking to the consumer, explaining what is science, etc. Do you have any good examples for all these technologies, the new approaches you're doing to make this more attractive in the end for your final consumer, bring it into the marketing for brand production, etc., from the consumer goods side, for example?
Yeah, so our focus, let's say we don't have a customer-facing business. So in essence, what we do is most of our work is, you'd almost term business to business, working directly with farmers. What we are, however, dependent on is a very strong connectivity to the consumer. And we do this through what we call food chain partnerships. So the example would be with PepsiCo, where we partner closely. PepsiCo would be much more aware of what the consumer needs are, would play that back into us. And a specific example, we would then develop a certification program for farmers that they can deliver exactly that product for that with that quality to the consumer. And the benefit for PepsiCo is that they're getting reliable, certified produce that's guaranteed produced in a sustainable manner. And we gain insights about what the consumer needs from PepsiCo and can translate that into something that works on the farm. So that's more the way we work with it today.
Okay, if there aren't any other questions, our time is up, so thanks all for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you.